With that, I'll turn the session over to Gabo Aurora.
Thank you, Peter. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Gabo Aurora, and I'm the head of a new concentration within the Film and Media program called Immersive Storytelling and Emerging Technologies, where we examine emerging technologies and how they intersect with the creative space. And it's impossible to have such a department and such a focus and not talk about what's, I think, on a lot of people's minds, on what's, I think, have been a really big sensation in the past couple of years, in the past year in particular, with NFTs, blockchain, crypto, all of these things that I think we're going to need to kind of wrap our head around and see what type of impact they have on society, on art, and on the future of commerce and everything that you can think of. Our particular focus is on impact NFTs and what they are. And I'm very happy to have both Elliot David and John O'Sullivan here from Carbon Basin Project ARC, who, in my experience of trying to understand this and kind of make sense of this space, I was most inspired by a lot of their projects that really use and look at this technology to tackle really urgent issues like climate change and many other things. So I'm very happy to have them here. Thank you for joining us here at Johns Hopkins. And I think we'll keep this in a way that we usually do it, where we've prepared a set of questions and we'll go through them, and they'll start out to be very basic, so that if you are watching at home or wherever you are, there is really going to be a basic primer to make sure that there is no prerequisite of having knowledge of what this is, because we're here to break it down. And then we're going to get a little bit deeper in some case studies, and then our panelists will tell us where we should be investing our money. No, I'm kidding. They won't do that, and they're not qualified to do that. But we will be touching on crypto and different types of crypto and what they are, because I think there's just so much sort of hype around that. So with that, I think in this first question, I'll dovetail it where you guys can talk a little bit about your journey and your bio. But I'd like to start with, what are NFTs and blockchain, and what brought you to it? And what were you doing before? What do you do now? And why are you dedicating your life towards it?
Terrific. So I think I'll start that one off, Gabo. And again, thanks for having us here. An NFT, the simplest way of explaining, is a digital contract. It's a piece of information that is verified on what's called the distributed ledger system, which is the blockchain, which means that it's transparent, everyone can see it. It's verifying information that no one can hack. If you wanted to change information on the blockchain, you would physically have to hack millions of computers. It's not going to happen. So it's essentially, radical transparency and radical democratization of, official accounting systems and banking systems. And an NFT, the way you could describe it as, art is really just scratching the surface of what an NFT could be. But there's only one Mona Lisa. There's about 1,000,001 reproductions of it. But what makes the Mona Lisa the Mona Lisa? It's got that Da Vinci signature. It was created by his hand. That's the same thing as a piece of digital art. You're teaching a program in, immersive art. I think that NFTs and digital art are the next big renaissance for people. I think that we can create experiences that are so emotionally evocative that, touch all of our senses, that isn't so, perhaps passive as traditional art, where, you interpret it, you look at it and you walk by, but something that you can touch, feel, experience, play with. That's kind of what NFTs represent an opportunity to have. Now, my background is in globalization, business, and development. That's what I did my master's in. I've spent time in Sri Lanka with women in the free trade garment sector. I've worked in Kenya with entrepreneurs, as well as indigenous people, both here in Canada and with the UN Special Advisor on Prevention of Genocide. I'm of the opinion that NFTs offer an opportunity not only to diversify the funding streams for some of these impact organizations that are, unfortunately spending 2/3 of their time fundraising, or, fighting each other for the next $10,000 grant, and sometimes even fudging the numbers because they're so afraid to share their failures because they're afraid to not get the next round of grant funding. So this NFTs offer an opportunity to not only give them more money, but to tell a story, to change the narrative. And I think that one of the biggest problems right now is that people try to get your $20 a month donation by guilt. Guilt is not the biggest motivating factor we have in this world. Let's inspire, let's educate, let's motivate, let's include, let's create a community. And so that's what NFTs create. I mean, the buzzword that everybody uses in NFTs is community, 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 community. That's the only way that anything has any value. It's how many people are engaged with your product. And so not only is this, massive implications for these impact projects, it's also massive implications for corporations. There's a term now, instead of B2C, it's Web3 to C. You can have an NFT on a tag of a product, and you can have a direct connection, a commercial embedded in a QR code, or an AR experience embedded in a QR code. The possibilities are endless. And we're dedicated to this because we're losing 150 species a day. We got 7 years until we have our final tipping point in climate change. And this is just another way to incentivize resource movement into the right hands, if that makes sense.
Great.
Thanks, John. And thanks, Gabo, and to all the participants. It's a pleasure to be here. John really hit most of the points that I was going to say, but what I sort of just want to add is that I think we're coming up to this nexus point where we're starting to reassign value to different things. And what I think is really interesting about blockchain, as John said, it's this, permanent, immutable register of, what went where, which can overturn all sorts of really interesting systems that rely on these kind of centralized accounting mechanisms, which we've effectively been using for the last, 2000 years, in terms of our record keeping society. What you can do is decentralize record keeping. You could decentralize, historiography. You could decentralize art. You can essentially empower anybody to participate in these systems and not have that mushrooming effect. And one really interesting way to look at it is our value system for a long time has basically been propped up by the value that's assigned to the consumption or the extraction of a particular resource. And so one really interesting example is fossil fuels, or the petrodollar. For a long time, the US dollar, which is the global reserve currency, has been sort of seen as this petrodollar in the sense that you actually have to buy US dollars in order to purchase oil. The global fossil industry, if you're some country and you want to purchase oil for your reserves, you'd actually have to buy US dollars, and then you'd have to almost like stake them and use them to buy fossil products. What we can do as we're redesigning this global financial system is say, what are we basing value on? Is it the extraction of resources? Or what if we had a monetary system that was based on the removal of CO2, or the, a global monetary system that's based on fighting climate change? So I think that's a really interesting application of blockchain and, impact NFTs in general. A little bit about myself. I'm fairly new to the blockchain NFT space, probably like some of you in the audience. My background is mostly in clean energy, international business sustainability. I'm a New York native, went to a public university through the City University of New York. I spent a little bit of time in China. I was a Schwarzman Scholar at Tsinghua University. That's when I sort of got interested in this, international sustainability, international climate affairs, and carbon management space. And so a little bit about the work that I do at Carbonbase is on the carbon accounting side, helping individuals, organizations to manage, understand their emissions. And in the case of blockchain and NFTs, what you can also do is take these digital assets and understand what are the emissions being created, how do you address them, how do you use NFTs to fight climate change. But yeah, that's a little bit about me and my work, and thanks again for having us.
Great. No, what I find inspiring about a lot of your work and what's happening with NFTs, when my background is more in virtual and augmented reality, and I came to it in 2014 from the United Nations. And what I found about something like virtual and augmented reality and emerging technology is when you had kind of non-tech people come into it and learn it and contribute and collaborate, what happened was exponentially more interesting. And I found that, similarly with your backgrounds, whether it's coming through climate or other ways, I think it's very fascinating. So my question is, a lot of our audience and a lot of the program are people who might have experience in policy or might have experience as creators and want to be filmmakers or want to be immersive artists. What does this have relevance to them, and why should they care? And specifically, I guess it's the artistic people that want to kind of create. Why should they care about this, and how will it impact their work, and what should they be thinking about now?
I think the number one thing here, and I've spent a lot of time and an ungodly amount of time in the last couple of months curating hundreds and hundreds of artists. And I think the key thing is that NFTs present the opportunity to no longer have a gatekeeper. In fine art, there's gallerists. In the movie system, there's producers. There's everybody telling you no. And with NFTs, go and create, share it with the world, find your community, because there's somebody out there that thinks that your art is the best art they've ever seen in their lives. It's as simple as that, right? Some people like realism, some people like 3D, some people like painting, whatever. It doesn't matter. Find your community, find your tribe, find the people that share in your narrative, your ethos, your message behind everything, and go for it. I mean, what the NFT technology is going to do for music in the next 10 years is going to shut record companies down. You know how many people have to get paid? Artists don't even get money off their record. They get money off of merchandise and touring. Imagine you can go to your buddy's studio, make an entire record, and 5 people get paid off your $13 million album. That's what Blau did with his first NFT album. I know that there's major stars that are about to release their albums via pure NFT. And I think that that's the thing. It's democratization and ownership of your intellectual property. Nobody can take a piece of the pie unless you say they get a piece of the pie. And that's an opportunity as well. It's a blessing and a curse, because any NFT artist that is worth their salt in the last year will tell you, I'm burnt out because I'm my lawyer, my social media manager, my marketer, you have to do it all. You are unless you have a collective, of people helping you, it's going to burn you out. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people to again, no longer be told no and to make a career out of this. Beyond that, I think that it's a wonderful opportunity for artists to come together. So there's something called the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, a DAO, where you essentially have complete, democratized governance system over, pools of liquidity and assets. And some of the best collectives of artists that I know of have DAOs. Like one that is, I think really changing the game is the most famous artist community from a wonderful guy named Matty Mo. And what he's doing right now for his artists, his goal is to get 10,000 artists to $100,000 a year. And that's $1 billion. I can't remember. Yeah, whatever. It's $1 billion worth of art equity in the world over 10 years. That's his goal. 10,000 artists, $100,000 a year, 10 years. So he's doing it. The guy is doing it. And it's largely because there is a system of contribution and remuneration and reward, because, lift all boats together. We are so far away from mass adoption with NFTs. It is a technology that is here to stay, and it's going to be a part of everyone's lives in due time. But there's so much market share to be had. Find your people, work together, and make it happen. So I would say to regardless of your artistic medium, explore, learn, connect, because I don't think you've ever met a group of people that are more open to radical collaboration than the NFT community. You get on a Clubhouse room for 2 weeks, you're going to find somebody to work on something cool that speaks to your heart.
Where do you think people can meet these people? Is it Discord? Is it
Clubhouse? Clubhouse is the way to do it. So Clubhouse is an app where it's like a running podcast. You can speak, you get on stage and make friends, but there is no substitute for human real-time connection, right? An email is an email, a cold call is a cold call, Discord message, Discord message. It removes the human element, and art is all about that human element, right? So the ability to listen to somebody, be inspired, message them after, or get on stage and talk to them, friendships are made, and business deals are made, right? I always say in my life, all the best things have come through a fortuitous conversation, a beer, and a handshake, right? Never an application online. So, go make friends. Like Clubhouse is the way to do it, and then get into these communities and go to these events. There's pop-ups everywhere. There's conferences. Just go talk, message someone on Twitter, shamelessly promote yourself and get into circles, because you're going to find your tribe.
That's excellent. Sorry, Elliot, you were going to say something. I apologize for.
Yeah, no worries. I was going to expand upon something that John had said before. in the sense that NFTs really can expand the types of mediums that you're able to use. So for example, immersive VR art is, historically it was not something that you were able to have individual or even democratized ownership of.
Yeah.
And with fine art, right? Like one person can own a statue, but with a photograph or a digital asset, for example, like a picture, if I take a picture of my cat and I put it, online somewhere, anybody can right click and save and download it. But with blockchain, you're able to effectively have that almost like Mona Lisa moment where you can have that signature. One person can have the unique ownership of it. And in that sense, you're opening up the artistic medium such that you're only limited by your imagination. And there's this really cool project we can maybe talk about a little bit later on in the conversation, where we're working with a world famous mycologist that is going to be using LiDAR to measure the frequency at which trees communicate in the soil, turning that into music, which will then be an NFT, and that's going to raise money for indigenous communities in Western North America. So like I don't know who comes up with this stuff, probably John, but it's you're really only limited by your imagination. And also, just to quickly address the other point that you brought up about policy, is that I think we're at the very earliest stages of what this can be. And a concern I actually have is that, much like the early stages of the internet, policymakers, weren't really thinking about, what could this look like in 10 years from now? And now you have, all sorts of issues with either big tech and sort of like the Wild West of the internet. So I do hope that there's some responsible policymaking in a way that is sort of conducive to innovation, but at the same time makes sure that down the line bad actors are discouraged. And a really interesting sort of component of this is this notion of the DAO that John had brought up, which again, I think we should have a sort of a longer, we can get more into it in depth later on, but at its core, what it does is it completely changes the way that we approach governance. So rather than having this kind of centralized governance model, you can have almost like a user-owned internet or user-owned assets or user-owned constitutions. Like there's all sorts of really cool applications of this new governance model. And all it really takes is like new thinking. It's not a crazy amount of code that you need to build these DAOs or to build these kinds of projects. But yeah.
Great. You'd mentioned Web 3.0 for our viewers. Can you talk a little bit about what is Web 3.0? What was Web 2.0? What was Web 1.0? And a little bit about what is kind of, you mentioned big tech. How does this work kind of either challenge or subvert a lot of the business model that exists now, which to me feels like about capturing your attention and manipulating you? Will this in some ways subvert that? Will it solve our problems, or will it create new ones? Because I'm sure big tech is, as they're quite savvy, I always hear decentralization and community and everything, but then I'm like, these guys are very clever. How do you see them reacting to it? Or do you think it's an unstoppable force for good?
Truth be told, I don't know yet. I would call this a rodeo and nobody knows which bull they want to ride yet, right? Like in terms of the metaverses, Facebook now changed its name to Meta. With the money, the power, and the dev team they have behind it, they're probably going to take a large market share. But I also know that Sony and Microsoft teamed up with Unreal Engine to make their own metaverse. Now you've got PlayStation and Xbox and the world's best PC, rendering, making a metaverse. And then you've got, Sandbox, and then you've got Decentraland, and everybody's going to find their niche. But like what Web3 is essentially a version of the future, or, the internet, where people operate on a semi-autonomous or quasi-autonomous, decentralized way. And I think that it provides a wonderful array of opportunities, especially for creatives, because imagine a world where, if you got the skills to build, you can build. If you've got a product or a service, you can launch it and people can come into this digital realm and experience it. So it's less barrier to entry, I would say. But I think by the very nature of the cost that's involved, you're still going to have a couple big players emerge. And does that make them big tech? I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like, we don't know until it happens. But I would say that it's incredibly disruptive. It takes the power out of the hands of, decision-making boards and puts it into the hands of creatives, people that just want to go out and build something. If you want to build it, go. That being said, the people that still host the platforms, they're probably still going to get their way in a sense. Like, for example, OpenSea is the largest NFT marketplace in the world, you know, multi-billion-dollar market cap, but their servers are their servers. So God forbid their servers ever went down, your stuff gets lost. So is it truly decentralized? You know, no, right? Some would argue no. Like, these are the questions. And I think what you're going to find a lot of as well is a friction between the OG crypto blockchain guys that, you know, a lot of them feel almost ostracized and alienated for so many years banking on this. And now that it's taking off, they're like, well, who are you to come in and take what I built and what I, you know, pioneered? So there's going to be an interesting dichotomy, because I think that mass adoption is something we all need, but commercialization and, for lack of a better word, bastardization of, you know, this pure, once pure idea could ruffle a lot of feathers. And so I think another big problem that you're going to have is protection. I mean, I don't know a single person who's got involved with NFTs that didn't get burned at least once, because, you know, there's no support line for Ethereum to call and say, I got scammed. It doesn't exist, right? So you can move money around borderless, and, you know, there's a lot of wonderful things, but I think that we still need the good actors in the space to come together and build and forge, you know, the new guide rails for how this is built. And one of the things that we're working on here is called the Impact Nfc Alliance, whereby we want to bring together all blockchain platforms, Web3 actors, payment processors, DAOs, anyone who wants to see the narrative change from I'm flipping a JPEG to money launder to this is a digital contract with immersive art and experience that is, you know, saving endangered species around the world. You know, let's raise all boats together, create a repository of the tips, tricks, tools, and resources and knowledge, so that when people Google, you know, how do I get involved in NFTs for good? They're going to come to us. They're going to see all the wonderful people that we're partnered with that can, you know, take their project to fruition. I think the other problem right now is that getting into the blockchain space is there's so much friction, because it's just too much. It's too much. It's like drinking water through a fire hose. It comes at you so fast. It's too much. And you don't know what's true and what's not. And then the technology changes so much in a month. What was true one day isn't true the next. So I think that the good actors need to come together and forge the space almost a little bit selflessly, and make sure that we are not, you know, that the mission and ethos is still shared by all of us, that we would like to see a world, you know, return to the hands of the people rather than in the hands of a very few.
This is great. So we have some questions in the chat that we'll get to towards the end of our session, so please keep them coming. I would like to now make it a bit more concrete and specific for people with case studies and specific examples that really, oh, hi, Max, that really inspire a lot of what inspired me. And specifically, I remember Project ARC, World Wildlife Foundation, a lot of the work you've done you've connected unexpected dots. So I'd like to just now shift. Well, we will do a little bit of, you know, talking a little bit about some of the specifics, because I want to make sure it's such a technical thing that people know what we're talking about. But I think now is a good time to just be like, what are these inspirational examples on your side and also across the world where you're like, this technology is doing something that nothing else can for this issue?
Max, you just hopped in. Did you want to take this one?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, guys. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to see the transformative power of actually having this direct access that you know, NFTs and representation can do. I think a lot of the things we see right now, like there is a strong gatekeeper sense between the people who actually want to contribute to a cause and also the types of funding opportunities available to people working on certain projects. There was an article that was published yesterday or day before talking about how these DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, may become the next source or the next focus point of actually this group crowdfunding opportunity. So there's one thing that happened very recently, I think that kind of is illustrative of what could be done. It was called Constitution DAO. And so it was an opportunity for people to try to purchase one of the 13 copies of the original Constitution document and over about 7 days, 17,000 people collectively contributed about 42 or 43 million US dollars actually to do this activity. And they went on Sotheby's and tried to auction, participate in the auction. Ultimately, the effort was not successful themselves to try to purchase this particular document, but it sort of speaks to the fact that 17,000 people can get together in less than 7 days and actually become a community of itself. And from there, there's been actually many interesting things that have come up. One of them actually is to fund intellectual research. And there's a sort of similar like effort to actually go and purchase a bunch of research content that's been locked up behind certain paywall access and say, okay, this collective group is now going to pay for the content and then release it into public domain. And then another effort now to take a particular piece of land in Wyoming, I think, under this name called CityDAO, and actually to create a similar governance structure as well. So this kind of is these are sort of anecdotal examples of this general ability for the kind of decentralized community to participate, en masse into a common goal in a very short period of time, and then have that goal be then guided and sort of governed by all the different stakeholders. On our side, with the Impact NFT collective, we've also seen many different artists and sort of cause-driven people use NFTs to tell a story that they want people to participate in, whether that is particular environmental conservation causes in marine life, in forestry, and in empowering people with sort of who are unable to access capital in the traditional way. After the transition of power in Afghanistan, a lot of females have lost access to banking, lost access to kind of financial services. And so we have a particular artist creating a set of works that once sold as NFTs actually then create money and fund flow to help service these particular people. So I think we're at this interesting inflection point where in the previous past, piece up to now, a lot of the crypto stuff was very much tied to quick financial returns. And a lot of people, frankly, became very wealthy from participation in this ecosystem. And from where we are now, I think going forward, now there's now about $3 trillion of market value inside the crypto community. That is a huge amount of money that can be very liquidly sort of rearranged and or transferred. That sort of creates a basis pool actually now for the second part, right, which is the meaning infused part. And tokens and generally generic trading tokens is very hard to capture symbolic meaning, but now with NFTs, you can have really rich metadata, storytelling, even tying into the physical world. You can actually sort of take data from what's happening in the physical realm of things and actually use that to change and alter the NFTs have. That's actually also going to create a lot more tie-in with things that people can directly relate to or care about.
Great. Would anyone else like to share any other examples that they are particularly inspired by? I know you'd already mentioned some. Were there other ones? Maybe someone could talk a little bit specifically about what you've done with the World Wildlife Foundation.
Yeah, terrific. So the initial project we were supporting is via our partnership with WWF Panda Labs, which is the innovation wing of the World Wildlife Fund, which is essentially committed to turning communities into conservationists, because conservation is always 100% of the time a human problem, never really an animal problem, right? And so unless you engage the communities that live in and around these vulnerable species and let them share in the opportunities that conservation provides, you often won't have success with your project. So WWF Romania had been working since 2014 to rewild the endangered European bison back into the wild. Now, this is Europe's largest land mammal. It went extinct in the wild in Europe in 1920. And thanks to the work of the WWF and local communities, they have the largest population in Romania in almost 200 years. And so what we were supporting was a project to actually engage the local community that has been living, pretty much the same way they have for hundreds of years, deep in the Carpathian wilderness, which is the largest and most biodiverse forest in Europe. Actually working with them to create, sustainable tourism, to also become the first line workers, for data feedback, for wildlife and forestry management, giving them the tools, the resources, and the tech that they need to give that baseline data back to make better decision making for policy making for the area. On top of that, we've also helped groups like Purple Penguin, which is an NFT project, which in that $50 to $100 NFT, it provided access to a metaverse game where you could battle your penguins and level them up. But 30% of all revenue went to support the endangered African penguin by helping them build nests. Another project that we work with the Peace Parks Foundation in Africa. It's the largest conservation area in Africa. We're helping with the facilitation of the relocation of 4 endangered leopards. Hopefully next year, we hope to do upwards of 75 giraffe and potentially the largest relocation of any endangered species in human history. And with each NFT purchase, you can bake in utility like naming rights for the animal, being able to visit the park, stuff like that. And then we also have a number of really exciting projects in the pipeline, but our number one goal is always to create a community around a cause and to provide utility, access, and ongoing reward systems for the person that purchases that NFT. The way you got to think of an NFT is much like a Patreon or lifetime membership access to that. And we are very big on making sure that people are communicated to the impact that we have on the ground with the organizations that we work with. We don't really believe that this, the NFT space will be sustainable if we just do one and dones and try to work with people that perhaps want to flip this for money. We really want to find mission oriented and mission aligned individuals that want to contribute, experience, and know that where every dollar they spend goes has a genuine, real impact.
Great. I want to talk a little bit about what overlaps a little bit with my work with VR and AR with the metaverse, because I think a lot of this, when we think of NFTs, is kind of digital goods and digital assets. And I think for the common layperson, they're like, well, I don't play Fortnite and I don't need a new skin. I don't need these things. I don't know if they are perhaps realizing what this can mean besides gaming or besides people who want to be in a headset for 24 hours a day. So I think, can you talk a little bit about this, the nature of how digital goods will be in our everyday lives? And because I think right now the examples feel trivial to most people. And I'm curious, and also as the metaverse matures and as headsets become lighter and hopefully Apple comes up with something next year, and we're more and more within a kind of digital world that's seamless with our physical world. I think it's a hard thing for people to imagine. I'm curious if there are any examples of where you speculate things would be, where it would have everyday use and not something niche as it feels right now.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Maybe just to step back for a moment, first, I think, Gabo, your work with actually, AR storytelling and VR storytelling is a big inspiration for us. And so we hope to really, in our work, try to, leverage more actively the power of sort of VR storytelling to sort of create immersive experiences for people. But I would say that as a whole, the total number of people who own Oculus and other sort of headset gear around the world is probably less than, pull a number, like maybe like less than 2 or 3 million people, right? Like probably less than 1 million right now with like active kind of VR usage. And so I think in the first phase of this kind of NFT piece, with the metaverse, it's going to be a lot more about the things you can do, through your computer. One of the experiences we participated in recently was actually this idea of Pizza DAO, which was, I think, 2,000 strangers on the planet collectively getting like thousands of pizzerias to give away free pizza, and there was kind of a sort of an online organization behind it, offline component, and then they were able to sell pizza themed art to raise funds to then wire money to all these different pizzerias and have them participate in this act of kind of public kindness. But as a sort of social impact thing, it was not super interesting, but as a social movement, it was super interesting, right? Because this actually was completely kind of decentralized, completely online, and reached tens of thousands of people's lives in real life as well. And I think over the next, this sort of continuous first phase, the way that people interact with the potential of the online assets is actually through kind of web browsers, through OpenSea, and also through various kind of interactive little games that people can play. The extension of this actually is something called play to earn, which is describing a set of video games where the game dynamics allow people to earn digital assets that are then tradable inside the larger digital asset world. Particularly, is a game called Axie Affinity, AXIE Affinity, that has a market cap, I think right now about $6 or $7 billion US. And there's a lot of reports of people, especially in sort of developing countries, where their participation in playing of this game has then led to economic gains for themselves to such an extent that they were to buy like a car, like an air conditioner, or a house in an extreme case. And they were earning like probably comparable amounts if they were just doing like physical work in wherever they are in the world, with actually spending the same amount of time playing on the internet and earning that way as well. So there's kind of crazy wealth creation sort of things where previously the way you made money is you had to sort of create value in your local community, but if the local community actually was not very well off economically, like you don't really have that much additional money you can make. Now with the internet, you can actually potentially make money as a freelancer on the internet. And now with all these decentralized sort of economic systems, you can actually make money by participating in and being a part of this economic system. So shifting from this kind of play to earn model to doing X to earn, right? Where X now can be some sort of other activity that you can improve and then imbue value with. We've been thinking a lot about how do you actually create something similar to a remove to earn, where remove in this case refers to carbon dioxide and also refers to pro-climate actions you can take in developing parts of the world. Like the challenge we see right now is that a lot of people who are contributing to the degradation, exploitation of the natural resources in their countries are not doing so because they hate nature. It's because this is actually the direct way that they can create value, right? The way they monetize the trees is actually to chop it down and turn to timber. So if we found ways to reward people to protect the natural environment in which they sit in, then that can become a source of livelihood that was totally not possible before. And we sort of use this collective action scheme that we mentioned earlier to basically fund the preservation of trees, fund the preservation of water streams, and also maybe coral reefs as well. So I think without even having this completely immersive Ready Player One AR experience or VR experience, today we're able to start organizing people in this fashion. And then when the hardware catches up and when it becomes sort of less nauseating, like cheap enough to actually have more people own one of these headsets, then you can sort of have the next phase of participation as well.
Great. We have some questions and we'll get to those really quick. Before we do, how does this dovetail with cryptocurrencies? And can you just talk a little bit about crypto and the different types of crypto? Because I think for a lot of people, they know Bitcoin, they might know Ethereum, but there's just a whole bunch out there. And what's to say, what are some of the pros and cons you see of the different ones, and how do they technologically differ? And do you think, what do you make of the biggest player, which is probably Bitcoin? Is it something that's here to stay? Do you have a critique of it? And I know these things, people have a lot of opinions around it, but I'm just curious, just the technological sort of underpinnings of it, I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think that there's a few kind of powerful concepts that the evolution of cryptocurrencies has really, highlighted, right? And so I think the first concept is around digital scarcity. So the sort of huge impact of the internet, revolution brought to traditional industries is that any kind of asset that was formerly a digital asset, specifically movies, MP3s, music files, books, and any web content that can be replicated, that can be represented, in digital fashion, can then be endlessly replicated, driving the marginal value of one of these items to zero, right? And so there's this huge piracy and sort of, IP fight that's been playing out for, I would say 10, 15 years, and really damaged a lot of the creative industries. Now, in the new, sort of crypto asset world, the first thing that happened with Bitcoin was the ability for people to create a provably scarce, fundamentally digital asset, right? This is actually the key value proposition of Bitcoin itself, is that it is actually, completely online, but there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. And that's, once that narrative really caught on and sort of, people understood it, and then were able to sort of prove that that is the case, Bitcoin accumulated, I think about, as of today, like maybe $800 billion in total value, right? Like sort of, going north of $1 trillion. And that's the cornerstone of actually a value creation. Like the fact that it could be provably scarce, allows other people to believe that this is a thing that they can, store value in. Now, moving from Bitcoin to Ethereum, the major intellectual leap was then saying, okay, if we had a system where we're, it would create things that are provably scarce, can we make the things themselves programmable, right? Bitcoin, I would call, actually in tongue-in-cheek style, I'll call it dumb digital money, because while it is digital money, like you can't actually, you can't actually program it to do stuff. All the programs you want to write on Bitcoin have to exist outside of Bitcoin itself. But in Ethereum, Vitalik's, sort of incredible idea was actually to embed into the blockchain itself something called an EVM, or Ethereum virtual machine, which is a Turing-complete kind of virtual machine that can then run arbitrarily complex code. And here we started seeing people actually, unleash a second sort of step of creativity, saying, if I can actually program my my digital assets to do certain things, right? I can write if statements now, right? I can actually, do a lot more. And Ethereum gave rise to, in 2017, this, massive thing called ICO Boom, where before, if you wanted to launch a token, you need to launch an entire blockchain, right? Similar to saying, if you had to, build a website, you have to first like write your own, TCP/IP kind of stack from scratch. Like it's a very prohibitively expensive thing. Now, like with Ethereum, you can actually just produce a token in about 50 lines of code, right? So, it sort of opened the door to a lot more kind of participation. You don't have to recreate the whole base layer before you can actually use the thing you want to do. And I would say that's sort of the second thing that happened. Ethereum really sort of became the standard bearer for, smart contracts, which are, ability to write arbitrary code on the blockchain. And then from Ethereum now, I think we're in this third phase where on one hand, there's a lot of public chains like Solana, Tezos, Polkadot, that are all trying to do what Ethereum does, but faster, cheaper, and with more throughput, right? So there's a sort of efficiency innovation layer that's happening. And then on the other side, we're now seeing a lot of interesting things happening in storage. So the ability for people to represent data and store data on this blockchain. There's a company called Sia, a company called Filecoin, and Swarm. These are actually now using the similar logic of the proof of work kind of mining machines, but now people are being rewarded to actually provide hardware and disk space. And I think this is actually going to sort of, as a programming perspective, unlock a lot of more sophisticated applications, right? Because if you can only, if your storage was super cumbersome, slow, and very expensive, you can only have very limited programs. Now you can store gigabytes of information, relatively cheaply. Your programs can actually become a lot more sophisticated. And so in the last, I would say probably 12 months, we see the rise of NFTs, which are essentially, richer metadata, more sophisticated metadata, stored on one of these distributed storage systems with a token. So it's kind of like taking the token idea from Ethereum plus all the rich storage stuff. Boom, that's basically NFTs. There's a second thing called DeFi, decentralized finance, where there are now modular, people call them like money Legos. They're like little functionality Lego pieces that represent different parts of the financial stack. There's like lending, there is exchange trading, there is storage and sort of interest-bearing kind of bonds. All of these things can be composed And instead of having to access one of these services through a traditional bank, you can actually just use a website to sort of, mix and match these particular pieces. And so DeFi has, become this huge concentrator of actually digital assets as well. I think reaching a sort of TVL total lock value of like probably $40–50 billion in about 6 months of time. And one of the things I sort of have a little insight in is I sit on the board of directors of a virtual bank out here in Asia, and watching this bank try to build a business from scratch, right? Launching itself, getting go-to-market, being publicly available to use, right? It's a virtual bank, it should be much faster. That actually compared to the appreciation, the sort of customer acquisition of one of these DeFi protocols, it's like there's a 10 to 20x difference in terms of how fast DeFi can go to market versus one of these traditional banks can go to market.
Great. That's very, very helpful in that way. When you mentioned, especially with programming, how certain crypto can do other things. But yeah, it came to mind, I've done some work with the USC Shoah Foundation, who work to archive and create a kind of historical record of genocides. Of course, starting, it was inspired by Steven Spielberg after he made Schindler's List, and focused on the Holocaust, but then they've done things around Rwanda and everything else that they're doing it. And they are now exploring how to counter fake news and to verify certain documentary evidence of genocides, to kind of use the blockchain in that way, to kind of make sure that that's kind of recorded and done that. And I think, again, to verify and to have a real record of what that is. So yeah, I think it is just the beginning, and I think your explanations have been fantastic, and I think it's just the beginning for people to kind of get to know more. I'd like to just address some questions that people have, because I think some of them are some that I had as well, but we'll go right. So we have one that's, how can you contest this with the direct effect NFTs and cryptocurrency in general have on the environment, seeing the large carbon emission they're responsible for? I still don't really understand how you could use NFTs to fight climate change. Thank you.
Oh, John, it looks like you're about to.
I think we all got something to say about this.
Yeah.
I'll let you guys build on this, but I think first and foremost, there's blockchains out there that are proof of stake, which, us being on the Zoom call uses just as much of an emissions creation as anything else. The way that proof of stake versus proof of work works, to explain it very simply, is that proof of work, like Bitcoin is on, or Ethereum is currently on, means if you want to prove one bit of information on the blockchain, on the ledger, it's like having 14 computers racing to finish it, and the first one to get it does it, but still those 14 computers did the work. It's like everyone running their race and expending the energy. But proof of stake, you're only having that one person do it, and therefore it's a much more easy transaction, right? And that is where Ethereum is heading. ETH 2.0 has been in the pipeline for some time now, and it should be, anytime in the next year and a half. So they say it's a big, technological undertaking. Now, at the same time, I think what people, there's a lot of misconception out there, which is the Bitcoin mining is not all blockchain processing to prove the things on the ledger. So minting an NFT is not the same as a 60,000 server farm in China running off coal energy. In fact, and I'll let Max and Elliot elaborate, but the vast majority, if not most, if not all, of the new Bitcoin mining processors in the US are coming off of renewable energy. That's why there are so many in Texas. There's reduced tax laws, as well as sunshine 90% of the year, right? These are the ways in which blockchain is adapting to these emissions questions. And I think one of the things that I find pretty funny is that, your bank hasn't diversified from fossil fuels. Most of the things we do in general haven't diversified from fossil fuels. We've known about it since ever, and people aren't doing the work. But the blockchain space gets a couple of angry Elon Musk tweets, and all of a sudden we're ramping up development time trying to fix this problem immediately. So I think that we're able to adapt and innovate at such a high, rapid pace that just because things are so easily tracked via the transparency of the blockchain, it's easy to say, well, you did this, that, and the other thing. But the hidden emissions questions of anything else is also something that is of worth equally criticizing. But I'll let these guys are the experts on that. If we get us all fired up this question though.
Yeah, but in a good way. And like,
Yeah.
you know, we should say that anybody in this space that's not self-critical or is not open to these kinds of questions, you should always kind of like, you know, like what, you know, what are you doing? To talk a little bit about the Bitcoin, you know, John already gave a good explanation of proof of work versus proof of stake. I think inherent in that question is like, is Bitcoin going to be like, is it going to be around, right? Like, is it something that's going to sort of stick around? Is it permanent? Is it here to stay? I would say that there's a couple of use cases for Bitcoin in addition to being, of course, a digital currency, but the fact that it could help the underbanked. You know, there's billions of people in the world that don't have access to the traditional finance sector, and at least for me personally, I think Bitcoin is a really exciting way where you can help people access capital, access you know, liquid assets, and also, you know, trade it and exchange it across borders and across communities. To talk a little bit about the emissions question, as John mentioned, nearly all of the new Bitcoin mining that's coming online is coming from renewables. The network as it stands right now, the most recent numbers say it's somewhere between 25 and 65% renewables. And that's not because, you know, Bitcoin miners are all super passionate about the environment and, you know, care about making the world a better place. The real reason is because they're always going to be looking for the cheapest source of electricity, because that's what powers the network. And it just so happens that we've gotten to the point where renewables happen to be, you know, the cheapest spot price. They have the cheapest spot price for electricity. This is not to say that the network is perfect and that it shouldn't go to net zero, right? You know, I was reading recently that the always on electronics and appliances in the United States alone, which is, you know, your laundry machine, your fridge or whatever, consume about 12 times the amount of electricity as the global Bitcoin network like will ever consume, which again, like kind of puts things in perspective. But if we're creating a new monetary system, a new economic system, we want to ensure that it's actually, you know, it's not just obfuscating or sort of shying away from the problem. We want to make sure it's designed to actually reduce emissions, to electrify and decarbonize. And so there's another initiative called the Sustainable Bitcoin Standard, which is essentially operating as a DAO that's bringing in, you know, climate scientists, NGOs, academia, you know, miners, institutional capital and finance. And it's trying to develop this protocol that would decarbonize the Bitcoin network. So we talk about how it's already mostly renewables, but they actually are hoping to get it completely carbon neutral. So what this effectively would do is this, you know, $1 trillion+ asset class would then become the lowest carbon asset class in the world, which is, you know, for me very exciting. And so to really, I guess, tie it all together to what is the name? Kaltar's question about cryptocurrency, NFTs, and emissions. I guess the real question we should be asking ourselves is, you know, what are we assigning value? So, for example, this Zoom call, which is consuming a certain amount of electricity, I assume that a lot of folks on the call are deriving some value from the call. If I, you know, build a whole server farm to mine Bitcoin, and it has a certain amount of value that we assign to it, and that can go to, you know, this or that social cause, or it can help this or that underbanked person. Like, to me, that is worth that electricity was worthwhile to be consumed. And then there's another like fungibility question that we can get into maybe on another time, because I know we're running out of time. But yeah, I hope that answers your question about emissions and NFTs and cryptocurrencies.
That's great. Yeah. Did you want to say something, Max? Yeah.
I'd say really quickly. So I believe that the first and second sort of major change, which is basically Bitcoin and Ethereum, you know, they were built on this principle of proof of work as a way to solve the concerns around double spending and start creating an economic network to sort of verify digital scarcity. I think everything after Bitcoin and Ethereum will probably be proof of stake and, you know, consume a lot less energy. These are kind of the ways that people actually even, you know, market and try to describe the systems they're building and try to get people interested. Bitcoin itself, you know, seems to have reached a tipping point where now a lot of major financial institutions are also contributing, right? And Jack Dorsey from formerly Twitter and Square, now called Block, is a huge public advocate for it as well. And I think the challenge with Bitcoin is then how do you actually make sure that the mining power for Bitcoin shifts from current situations to green, to sort of green electricity. And Elliot mentioned sustainable Bitcoin standard is one of the drivers that's pushing this forward. And then on Ethereum itself is actually rebasing, as Johnny said, over to proof of stake as well. So over the next few years, I think we'll see the digital asset community become one of the greener communities, just because it is made out of individuals who collectively want to actually drive this, right? And one of the maybe ways that they want to play against the traditional financial institutions is to say that we can beat you to being net zero sooner. And I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic as well.
Great. Well, I think we're heading towards the end of our time. We had I think some other questions were kind of touched on. We have a question that says, it seems from the chat that it is either or situation, centralized or decentralized, or music companies or not. Why not all of the above? Do you see this coexisting, or do you see this as, I guess it's the question of, will this just like, absolutely transform how the internet will be and our society and the world will be? Or do you think there is a room for both? There are obviously concerns, I date myself, but I got excited about the internet in the 90s, and its original promise is nowhere near where it is. It was supposed to be about connection. I would have never imagined that it would have the amount of consolidation and monopoly that it does. And what makes me sad the most about it is, there is still, and we do this in our courses, we have a virtual productions class where there's just amazing things your computer and your phone can do, like with scanning. You can turn into an incredible creator and find things that are there. But a majority of people go into 3 apps, like they go to Google, they go to Facebook, they go to CNN, maybe the New York Times, and that's it. Like they don't really use the total potential of what's in their pocket and what's possible. And on top of that, I wouldn't have assumed the kind of safety concerns that have happened. I think it's really freaked out, and rightfully so, right? With terrorism, for children, for so many other things. I think there's a lot here that excites me, but I can see just the way things are going that, there will be a lot done to kind of stymie it, because it does empower, nefarious actors. It does endanger some people, minors and other things that could happen. And there is a kind of Wild West thing with people getting scammed and other things, but it shouldn't disrupt it. I guess what I'm trying to say is there a room that you see that there will be a coexistence, or do you see a complete radical transformation on how this will be? And will it live up to its promise? I hope it does. But coming from where the internet was going, it's a very disillusioned state, of where the internet is, now 20, 25 years on.
I'm of the opinion that there is room for both, but I think there are so many unknowns, right? I think that money definitely talks, especially when it comes to building out something that is as technologically advanced as some of these massive platforms, whether it be social media, whether it be information platforms. But money does talk in that realm. I think that the most beautiful thing, though, is that it provides choice, right? It provides choice for a group of concerted individuals to pool resources and build and create in this new space, and do so rapidly, and do so with the opportunity to create as much of a community, as large of a community as they would want. It's removing the barriers to entry to create something successful. And I think that that's the interesting part. Now, what I would love to see as well, though, just because, bad actors exist in every facet of human life, that's human nature, is that there are a concerted group of individuals that put, competition aside and do help steer the blockchain space into the right direction. I think it will take thought leaders, it will take creatives, and it will take a real concerted group to make sure that we do continue to weed out those bad actors and put up those guardrails that I was talking about earlier, right? I mean, it cannot be the Wild West forever, because when people are unsafe, especially when it comes to money, people don't adopt it. People don't use something that they don't understand, and they certainly don't use something that, you know, they're at risk of losing, you know, their identity, their livelihood, or whatever the case may be. So it's going to be a collaborative effort to build, but I am also of the opinion that the powers that be that are the current monopolies will be using blockchain and will help steer that into the future. So whether or not they're able to monopolize it, we will fully see. I envision them helping out build the major platforms through which other creatives can monetize and create their community on top of.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I'll jump off of John's points just to say two quick things. One, I think in this question we're talking about, like, are we moving towards a decentralized or a centralized world, systems? I would say that no system is purely decentralized or purely centralized. Like even a cryptocurrency or a coin, like there is a contract or a constitution that's sort of embedded to it, right? Like the fact that Bitcoin will only ever have, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. That's not, you know, by chance. It's because it was designed from the beginning. So, you know, I think that's one important thing to consider. And then the other point I was going to say is that, and I agree with John that I think that these two systems can coincide. In fact, I think they have to. Some things do better when they're decentralized and some don't. So for example, voting, right? Like we want that as decentralized as possible. We want people to, everybody to have input into who governs them, and, you know, obviously have safeguards in place for that. But some things I wouldn't want decentralized. So for example, the military, right? Imagine if, you know, every single person was armed and equipped with weaponry and, you know, sort of like have at them. It would literally be the Wild West. So I think to strike that healthy balance, we have to recognize that blockchain in general is a tool, and like any tool, it really depends on how we use it.
Great.
And I'll let Max close this out.
Please, and
Yeah, and I think you know, part of the frustration I think that led to the creation and adoption of this whole decentralized you know, movement actually came from the abuse of power from centralized actors, right? Like this is actually a direct one-to-one mapping. You know, the early days of Bitcoin, there was a quote embedded in the block creation process of Bitcoin that cited the, you know, exchange on the, you know, on the brink of the second bailout of the banks. This is actually referencing the 2008, 2009 financial crisis and the lengths at which, you know, the government went to save banks that, you know, were frankly part of the problem. And people, you know, regular people losing their shirts and their life savings, while people who are working as banks that, you know, may have caused this, you know, receiving millions of dollars in bonus payments. So I think, you know, that was kind of the genesis, and that genesis is then sort of transformed here, where today a lot of the visionary applications being built, you know, in this new kind of Web3 format, try to give power back to the user, give them back data sovereignty power, so the data fundamentally belongs to the user as opposed to the platform they sit on, gives them the ability to control their attention. So there's a few applications out there that sort of are cleaning up the way that, you know, that advertising works on this format, giving them the ability to directly create and receive value. So, you know, the content, as a content producer, now you can actually get directly funded by your readers as opposed to having to, you know, indirectly receive advertising revenue as a way to monetize your creative output. And I think, you know, sort of where we're going in the future is actually being able to write the rules of engagement of the way that people interact with one another into the protocol itself, right? So going back to like Marshall McLuhan's, like the medium's the message, the medium now is a programmable layer that can actually change, that can actually define the way that two peer people like you and I can interact peer-to-peer with one another, or we can actually interact, you know, multiple people to multiple people. And so I think there is a hope that the, you know, sort of Web3 revolution can restore some of the early premises of the internet, you know, back in this format. And at the same time, I think the experience of actually participating in the last 15, 20 years of the internet cycle has made people more wary of what centralized power looks like, right? I would actually even have an argument that when the very beginning days, you know, people did not fully understand the power of information. And so they willingly gave away their information to use a free service, to sort of use a social media network. And now on the other side, we now understand how powerful that is, and also the roles that, these advertising platforms can play in actually shaping public perception in misinformation, in influencing elections, and many other things. And so now we're sort of wiser for it. We sort of experience all of the potential problems we can have, we have a chance to rebuild in a better and more thoughtful way.
Right. Well, thank you. That's a great way to end. I'm really grateful for your taking the time, sharing your knowledge and expertise. I think it's a very exciting and hopefully less intimidating topic for a lot of people, and they get engaged with and don't ignore. So thank you so much, and I'm very grateful, and keep doing all the great work and keep us in the loop, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you
for having us,
guys,
Gabo.
and thank you to all the audiences. Yeah.
Yeah. And if they're interested in getting involved, they should just reach out.
Excellent. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
For everyone.